Good afternoon. This is Kenya News Update today, and I'm your host. We begin with a story that has sent shockwaves through British politics and drawn international attention to the ongoing fallout from the Jeffrey Epstein scandal. UK Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer has issued a stunning public apology, not for his own actions, but for believing what he calls the lies of one of his most senior appointees. The controversy centers on Peter Mandelson, the veteran Labour politician whom Starmer appointed as British ambassador to the United States last year. Today, in an extraordinary and unplanned diversion during a speech on community funding, Starmer directly addressed the victims of Jeffrey Epstein to express his regret for placing his trust in Mandelson. He stated, and I quote, "None of us knew the depths and the darkness of that relationship. But the question now is whether an apology is enough, or if this represents a profound failure of judgment at the highest level of the British government. We'll be diving deep into the timeline of events, the political fallout, and what this means for UK-US relations under the Trump administration. We'll also examine the numbers behind the appointment process and the public's reaction. Joining our debate today, we have perspectives from political analysts on both sides of the Atlantic. First, let's establish the timeline. Peter Mandelson, a figure synonymous with the new Labour era of Tony Blair, was appointed by Prime Minister Starmer in July of last year. The announcement was framed as a strategic masterstroke. Mandelson, a former European Trade Commissioner and UK Business Secretary, was touted for his unparalleled experience in international trade and diplomacy. His mandate was clear: to navigate the complex relationship with the United States under President Donald Trump's second term and to secure crucial trade agreements in a post-Brexit world. The appointment was confirmed after what Downing Street described as a rigorous vetting process. Official records show that out of a field of 52 total applicants for various senior diplomatic posts that cycle, Mandelson was one of only 12 individuals shortlisted for the top-tier ambassadorial roles. His selection was announced alongside 3 other key postings. The initial reaction was mixed, but largely accepted within political circles. However, whispers about Mandelson's past associations had been a matter of public record for years. His social and professional links to the disgraced financier Jeffrey Epstein were known, though often dismissed as part of the high-flying social circuit of the late 1990s and early 2000s. Mandelson himself had previously stated he regretted the association. The crisis erupted this week with the release of newly unsealed court documents and a relentless campaign by victim advocacy groups. These documents, while not alleging criminal activity by Mandelson, painted a more detailed picture of the social nexus around Epstein. They revealed that Mandelson had been a guest at Epstein's properties on multiple occasions between 1998 and 2005, a period that overlaps with Epstein's known criminal activity. Pressure mounted on Starmer to explain why, given this known history, Mandelson was deemed a suitable candidate for such a sensitive role. The Prime Minister's initial response was seen as defensive. He pointed to the vetting process and Mandelson's assurances, but the political storm refused to die down. A snap poll conducted by YouGov in the 48 hours before Starmer's apology showed a dramatic shift in public opinion. When asked if Mandelson was a suitable ambassador to the US, public approval had plummeted. Before the document release, a modest 38% of the public approved of the appointment. After the revelations, that figure crashed to just 19%. Conversely, disapproval skyrocketed from 45% to a staggering 68%. The numbers were a political earthquake. It was against this backdrop that Starmer stood to deliver a speech on a completely different topic, a new £2.3 billion fund for local community regeneration. But he knew he could not ignore the elephant in the room. He opened by directly confronting the issue. "Before I begin," he said, "I must address the growing anger and the profound hurt surrounding the appointment of our ambassador to Washington." He continued, "I want to be unequivocal. To the victims of Jeffrey Epstein, I apologize. I apologize for believing the lies told to me about the nature of that association. I appointed Peter Mandelson based on his record and on assurances that have proven to be, in the light of what we now understand, profoundly inadequate." The key phrase here is believing the lies. Starmer is positioning himself not as a negligent leader, but as a misled one. He is transferring culpability directly to Mandelson for what was communicated during the appointment process. He acknowledged that the connection was known, but stressed, "None of us knew the depths and the darkness of that relationship. Had we known, the decision would have been different." The apology, while targeted at victims, was also a clear political maneuver to draw a line under the scandal. But has it worked? The conservative opposition, led by Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, has seized on the moment. In a fiery response in the House of Commons, Sunak declared, "This isn't just about bad judgment, it's about a fundamental failure of due diligence at the heart of this government." He pressed the point further, asking, what exactly was the vetting process? What questions were asked? And who is ultimately responsible for this catastrophic error? The conservative attack line is potent. It frames Starmer as either incompetent for not knowing or deceitful for pretending he didn't. They are demanding a full, independent inquiry into the appointment. Let's bring in our first perspective. From London, political analyst Anya Sharma argues that the apology, while necessary, is too little too late. Starmer's brand was built on competence and integrity, she says. This episode chips away at both. The public data is damning. A 50-point net approval swing on the appointment is catastrophic. The apology manages the immediate headlines, but it doesn't answer the systemic question: how did a man with this known association pass through the UK's supposedly world-class diplomatic security checks? The focus now will be on whether Mandelson resigns or is recalled, and what that means for the UK's standing in Washington. Now, let's consider the international dimension, particularly the view from Washington. The role of British ambassador to the United States is arguably the most important overseas posting. The ambassador is the primary conduit between Downing Street and the White House. At a time when President Trump is pursuing an America First trade policy, and the UK is desperate for a bilateral trade deal, having an ambassador under a cloud is a significant liability. The US political scene is also highly sensitized to the Epstein case. Any association, however tangential, can become a weapon in the fierce partisan battles. We have already seen comments from Republican lawmakers questioning Mandelson's fitness for the role. From our studio in Nairobi, we also consider the African perspective, particularly Kenya's relationship with both the UK and the US. President William Ruto's administration has been actively strengthening ties with the Trump administration, particularly on security and trade. A weakened or distracted UK diplomatic corps in Washington could subtly shift the dynamics of engagement in the region. Kenya values its relationship with Britain, but it also pragmatically navigates its crucial partnership with the United States. Uncertainty in one part of that triangle creates ripples. Returning to the domestic UK politics, let's examine the potential consequences. The immediate question is the fate of Peter Mandelson. As of this broadcast, he has not offered his resignation. He released a brief statement expressing his own regret for ever knowing Epstein and his full support for the Prime Minister. But the pressure is immense. If he stays, he becomes a permanent lightning rod for criticism, undermining his effectiveness. If he goes, it is a massive humiliation for Starmer and confirms the opposition's narrative of a grievous error. Furthermore, there are financial and procedural implications. The cost of appointing, installing, and potentially recalling an ambassador is substantial. Official estimates put the total cost of setting up a new ambassador in a major post like Washington, including relocation, security, and administrative setup, at approximately £850,000. If Mandelson is recalled, that investment is largely wasted, and the process must begin again, incurring similar costs. Beyond the individual, this scandal threatens to derail Starmer's political agenda. He came to power promising a break from the drama and sleaze of the past. This episode feels like a throwback to an older style of politics. It consumes oxygen that should be spent on his domestic policy goals, like the community funding announcement he was trying to make. It also sows doubt among his backbenchers about his political management. Our second perspective comes from former diplomat James Omondi, who argues for a more nuanced view. We must separate moral outrage from practical diplomacy, Omondi contends. The association with Epstein is morally repugnant, but unless evidence emerges of wrongdoing by Lord Mandelson himself, his professional competence is not in question. The Prime Minister's apology addresses the moral failing. Recalling Mandelson now would be a purely political act that could damage UK interests. It would leave the embassy in Washington leaderless for months during critical trade negotiations. Sometimes, the politically difficult choice is to endure the storm. This is a classic debate, principle versus pragmatism. Starmer's apology was an attempt to satisfy the principle. Keeping Mandelson in post would be the pragmatic move. The problem is that in the court of public opinion, principle often wins. The victims' advocacy groups have been clear. They do not accept the apology as sufficient. They are calling for Mandelson's immediate removal, stating that no victim of sexual abuse should have to see a friend of their abuser representing a nation on the world stage. This powerful emotional argument is difficult to counter with realpolitik. As we move into the final segment of this deep dive, let's look at the historical context. This is not the first time a British political appointment has been mired in controversy over personal associations. However, the shadow of Jeffrey Epstein is uniquely dark and global. The scandal has ensnared princes, presidents, and billionaires. For a serving British ambassador to be directly connected to it through the Prime Minister's apology is unprecedented. It raises serious questions about the vetting, or due diligence, process for high-level appointees. What level of scrutiny is applied to an applicant's past social circles? How far back does it go? And who has the final say when a candidate's professional brilliance is offset by personal baggage? The Starmer government will now be forced to review and likely overhaul these procedures. In conclusion, Prime Minister Keir Starmer's apology to Epstein victims is a dramatic moment that exposes a deep wound in his administration. It was a necessary act of political contrition, but it has solved very little. It has instead opened a new chapter of scrutiny and political warfare. The plummeting public approval ratings for the Mandelson appointment show the depth of public dismay. The Conservative opposition is armed with a powerful narrative of failure. The ambassador himself sits in a precarious position in Washington, his authority diminished. And the victims, whom the apology was meant to address, remain unsatisfied. The coming days will be decisive. Will Mandelson fall on his sword? Will Starmer be forced to recall him? Or will they attempt to ride out the storm, betting that the news cycle will move on? For UK-US relations, for the Starmer premiership, and for the ongoing pursuit of justice for Epstein's victims, the stakes could not be higher. This is a story about trust, judgment, and the long, dark shadow of a criminal past that continues to shape the present. From our studios in Nairobi, that is our deep dive analysis. Subscribe to Kenya News Update today for continuing coverage of this and other major international stories.